All right. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Happy time zone, wherever you are. Hope your day is going great. Very different intro music today, but that was all this person right here, Bakari Holmes. How much of that track did you make? Like, did you do like all the, well, I mean, maybe not all the vocals, but you did a lot of the vocals and stuff on there. But tell us about that track that you made.
Yeah, so I was executive producer. I sang lead on the first song,
Okay.
and I sang bass the rest of the song.
Okay.
And then I kind of like put some spot vocals in different places. But the rest of the vocals were done by an international cast of characters, some popular YouTubers,
Huh.
uh, vocalists from UK, and some other vocalists around the world. Yeah, but
That's
it's
very
a
cool.
lot of fun to make, and
Yeah.
happy to see it out in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was happy to use that as our intro screen for sure. So, welcome everybody. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website techinterview.guide. Today we got Bakari Holmes with us, hanging out. Bakari and I met through a bunch of circumstances.
Twitter.
Yeah, through Twitter mostly, but I was on a podcast called Teach Gen Tech, and you were also on that podcast. And I think
Yep.
Jen connected us on Twitter. You've applied for a job at Postman. We still got you in the waiting queue for that. We hope that's gonna evolve in its own way at some point once our hiring freeze stops.
I see what
But
you did there with the Evolve. I see that.
yeah, right. But yeah, super happy to have you on the stream today. Um, so we're going to hear a little bit about
Here.
Bakari's background and so on. If you want to stay in contact with Bakari, you can do exclamation point guest in chat, and you'll see LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as a link to the Spotify track that we used for the intro song today. So feel free to do bang guest and get that information. So Bakari, let's start with your background. Tell us a little bit about like kind of who you are as background, then we'll get into like what's your tech background and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I don't consider myself one thing. I consider myself multiple things. Um, like currently, I am a software developer and developer advocate,
Mhm.
but previously, I have been a physicist. I actually did some undergrad research on a NASA project that resulted in a device going to Mars um, on a rover. I've been a teacher, educator for about 12 years for high school physics, astronomy, music, um, and engineering. And then I made the courageous decision to leave teaching and become a software developer. So,
Awesome.
and throughout all that time, I've been a musician. So I guess I didn't mention that, but yeah, I'm a musician. I love music. I sing. I play piano. I dance. Actually, I got started dancing and then started singing after that.
That's sweet.
Growing up in a very musical family.
That's very cool. Um, I'm curious about the Mars Rover. So the thing that you built that went up to with the Mars Rover, is that the one that's still going, or is that the one that stopped working like a couple of years ago?
You know what? I actually haven't kept up with which version of the rover
Oh, okay.
is up there. But I remember mid 2000s, it was still on that rover.
Okay.
Um, and it's basically a device that um, detects isotopes of carbon. The reason why we
Okay.
care about
Oh,
that
sweet.
is it's an organic marker. So it was part of
Right.
SETI, or the search for
Yeah.
extraterrestrial intelligence. Yeah.
I remember being part of the whole like SETI at home thing that was like doing all the you download like bits of information and try to crunch on it to see like was that radio signal like extraterrestrial life or was that like just some random radio
Yeah,
signal kind of thing. Um,
definitely.
and then that whole thing branched off into like this whole other realm where you could get into like protein folding to try to find cures for cancer and diseases and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's like really
It's
fascinating
it's
stuff.
crazy. It's so
Yeah.
crazy. So we were just concerned with soil samples, and this was a laser. It was what's called a laser spectrometer. So you can
Mm.
imagine like a gas. Like
Right.
say they got a soil sample and they like heated it up, and then some gas was evaporated, and then a laser shot through it, and that laser essentially creates what's called a spectrum. And maybe from your high school chemistry class, you remember like looking through these different lamps and
Mhm.
seeing these different bars. That's essentially what we're doing. We're doing it digitally though.
Okay,
Um, yeah.
that's pretty awesome. Cool. And then from that, you said you were also into teaching as well. So tell us a little bit about your teaching background. Like, how did that lead into like education and things like that? And what kind of groups have you been involved in there?
Sure. So I was working at this lab at NASA Ames in the life sciences building. It was a pretty like kind of dark and dank building. I was like in the back, programming in Fortran, crunching all this data, and there was like four people on our project, essentially four people that I interacted with, and I just was like kind of looking at my future, like, do I want to do this for the next 30 or 40 years? Do I want to make incremental advancements in our understanding of how to gather data to possibly one day maybe be able to detect life? And I was just
Hmm.
like, I'm not sure. So I ended up working as an executive assistant in this office that placed teachers in their observation and their student teaching. And so I started to learn about the process of becoming a teacher. And I don't know why I didn't think of this before, because my mom is an English teacher, um, for like 40 years. I think 30 of them were in Oakland. But it like the light went off, and I was like, oh, maybe I should become a teacher. And I was tutoring before that at San Jose State at the college that I was going to. So I was tutoring calculus, physics, chemistry, um, and so I guess I put two and two together, and I was like, well, I really love interacting with people. I really love just helping people solve problems, and so I kind of changed course, and yeah, I ended up landing my first teaching gig in Monterey, and actually it was pretty funny. I was thinking that I was going to teach science, and a position opened up for a music teacher,
Hmm.
a music teacher position, because the music teacher had left at the beginning of the year in Salinas. It was just a middle school,
Hmm.
and or I'm sorry, it was Seaside. And so I went and I applied, and they looked at my background, and they're like, "Yeah, you could. We think you can do this." And so I was like, "Okay," and I did it. I finished the year out. It was kind of like one day I was like on top of the world, and then like another day I'd be like in a ball on the floor, like you know, like the crying game. Well, sorry, I don't know if you guys know that. know
I
that
think
reference.
only a few of us in chat are going to be old enough to get some of these
Yeah,
references, but
there's
it's
gonna
all
be a
good.
few people going, oh, I know what he's talking about. Everyone
Yeah,
else, what's the crying game?
it's a good movie. You should go watch The Crying Game.
Yes,
So,
please. And then once you
absolutely.
see that scene, you're gonna be like, oh, that's what he's talking about. Because
Yeah,
people
yeah,
reference it in like all this in pop culture, it's constantly referenced.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think even Ace Ventura had like a
Yeah.
Crying Game reference in there at one point, right?
Yeah, he
Finkler
surely did.
Einhorn, what?
Oh my gosh.
uh,
That
showing
guy
our
was my
age here.
hero.
So,
Yeah, that guy was my hero for like a whole year and a half. I was
yeah.
like walking around the house to my wife's chagrin.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, doing Ace Ventura isms.
Yeah, there was that and Dumb and Dumber. I think I could quote both of
Yeah.
those movies word for word for like
Oh
years.
my
That
gosh.
and Wayne's World, like the first Wayne's World
Yeah.
movie, like yeah, yeah, unbelievable, unbelievable.
Oh man, we
It's
gotta we gotta meet up and have a marathon.
oh for sure. It's funny how many similarities you and I have as far as our background because I've been tutoring all the way back into my college as well. I started in electrical engineering and I had to take a programming class as part of that, and I found I was way better at the programming side than the hardware side. And so I switched my major and I went into computer engineering instead. And I started tutoring on programming and basically stuck with it. My dad was also a teacher. He was teaching
Mm,
at the college where I was doing electrical engineering. And I'm like, well, dad's a teacher. Mom likes to teach. Like maybe I should try teaching. And the tutoring was very natural. And of course, I was paid as a tutor. So I'm like, oh, sweet,
mm.
I get paid to help other people learn things that I already know. And later on in life, here I was, found myself being a full time software teacher, and what I felt was pretty darn good at it, but also having my own like crying game moments of like, why don't they get it? Why don't they like me? Um, because turns out just being really good at something doesn't make you a good teacher. You have to
That's
understand
true.
like
That's
how to
very
actually
true.
educate people and how to like
Yep.
actually get through to them and speak to them on terms that they're going to understand. And
Yeah.
like I can't walk into a classroom and make like crying game references. It's gonna go way over their heads when they're all like mid 20s,
Right.
30s, like they haven't even seen that movie, or a movie came out when they were like a little kid and they don't remember that song or whatever. It's like, we would do a project about, a music jukebox and cycling through music. And it's like, all right, well, let's get some Journey on here. And they're like, who? I'm like, Don't Stop Believing. They're like, oh, I think I heard that at a karaoke bar one time. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh
Or a
no.
Glee.
Yeah, yeah, or Glee, or didn't I hear that song like in the elevator? It's like, oh no.
Yeah. Right.
That's how we know we're old, right? Is our favorite songs
Yep.
show up in the elevator. So yeah,
Wah, wah,
cool.
wah.
Womp womp. So and then like tell us a little bit more about your journey into tech and like getting into like the programming side and some of the like technical education and stuff. Go into a little more detail on that for us.
Sure. So I after that year as a music teacher, I actually got laid off. There were a whole bunch of layoffs in the area in the different districts. I think there was two districts actually, Salinas and Monterey Peninsula Unified. So I was laid off, and a teacher with 15 years of experience got that position, which I was totally fine with. Um, this is fine. This is fine. Um, and then again, this shows my age. I opened up the paper. I actually of like a physical paper, and there was this school that was looking for three physics teachers, which was really unusual to me. And then the other thing that was unusual, it was that was in East Side Salinas,
Okay.
which really isn't known for like cranking out scientists or anything like that, or tech. It's really known for agribusiness because there's so much
Hmm.
agriculture there.
Gotcha.
And so I was like, I got to check this out. And so I, applied. I nailed the interview, got the job, and I was kind of like off to the races because I really felt like I was starting to find my stride. I at the same time, enrolled in a teacher prep program. So in that teacher prep program, you learn a lot of different things that help you be effective as a teacher. And
Hmm.
I didn't realize how much went into like being able to construct a good lesson or being able to deliver a lesson, being able
Hmm.
to manage a classroom, being able to understand developmentally what happens at different ages and to take that into account when you're teaching lessons. So, anyways, I
Hmm.
enrolled in that program and started. We had this physics collaborative. So, essentially, what we would do is we would get together. We would talk about standards. We would talk about what we want to teach. We would talk about lessons that we want to execute. Then we go execute it, and then we would come back together, and they would talk about how it went. And
Hmm.
it was based on the Japanese lesson study, and
Okay.
that I think that was kind of the golden era of my teaching career because not only was I, being able to teach and kind of infuse my personality and culture there, and it was like 90% Hispanic.
Okay.
Um, and there were very few, Caucasian folks. There were very few black folks, maybe like a few, like four or five. I'm talking. And so it was a very interesting experience, just immersing myself in the culture there. um, and eventually I got tenured. Eventually I got my credential, and I was there for 5 years and really, really, uh, was able to make a huge impact on the community there, and felt like the community really embraced me and my family. Uh, but then, we were out in Salinas, and we at the time, I got married, had kids, and it was just really far from my family. So
Hmm.
we actually relocated back up to the Bay Area,
Okay.
and I ended up getting three offers from Gun High School, Prospect High School, and a school in Castro Valley. I think it was Castro Valley High. And
Okay.
so I took the job at Gun High School. It's like one of the top schools in the nation. It's always in the top 100. In California, it's like maybe number one. So I taught physics, and then I taught physics and astronomy, and then I actually started an engineering program because I was asked to um, start something that was going to bridge when kids came from middle school and came to the high school, but they really didn't have like a lot of hands-on engineering type courses.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if you want me to stop yet or you want me to keep going.
I have two follow-up questions so far. So tell us a little bit about you talked about, a little bit about a Japanese lesson or something. What was that about?
Yeah. So Japanese lesson study is so there's these series of like videos that show this philosophy that some teachers in Japan were using, and it was a very scientific approach at learning how to um, again construct a lesson, set standards, construct a lesson based on those standards, also with outcomes, it's outcomes based, and
Okay.
then to construct lessons together as a group versus like by yourself. Like in America, a lot of times we do a lot of things by ourselves, and then maybe we meet to kind of sync up, but it's a lot of stuff is done on our own. But this was like more, it was a lot of it was done together, and then once you go out and you deliver the lesson on some with some agreed upon things that you're going to look for to see if it was effective or not. So you agree on those things ahead of time, and then when you come back together, you discuss it and you say what
Mm.
worked, what didn't work. We already had some standards. These are the things we're going to look for to evaluate. So either you say, hey, we want to keep building on this, or you say we need to change the way that we're measuring,
Mhm.
or um,
So
I don't know.
like a retrospective, like an agile retrospective, basically
Totally.
on the lesson
Yep.
itself. That's pretty
Yes.
cool.
Totally.
Neat.
Except it
Um,
was a lot more collaborative in terms of the planning and execution.
I see.
I think that's probably something that's maybe different about, like, say, our agile.
Okay. Well, I mean, typically in an agile process, it would also be collaborative. Like, what do we as a team decide? Like, this worked, this didn't work. Let's try this a little different. Like, that would still be a pretty collaborative effort. I mean, that's kind of the point of the
I
retro
guess
is
so.
to give that feedback so that you can,
Yeah.
like when I would run my retros on my team, it wasn't so much like what went well, what didn't go well, and that was that. It was like, what can we try different for next time? So we're taking all this feedback to actually try to improve something or to move the needle on something, to see what kind of effect that was going to have.
Yeah. Actually, you're right. And I'm thinking about like code review
Hmm.
and just different software teams that I was on. At least most of them had that collaborative aspect
Okay.
where yes, you're agreeing on standards ahead of time, you're agreeing on how long it should take, you're trying to
Mhm.
weigh different things, and as you go out, you go out and you start executing, there is like Slack, there is ways that you can actually post code snippets or errors that you're running into and get help. um, so yeah, I would say that is definitely probably closer to the what the Japanese lesson study
Yeah.
model, and it's been very famously used as kind of as a model for like education reform in
Mhm.
different places in the states.
Yeah.
Some people like follow that like to the T, and some people just take
Right.
some
Right.
parts of it.
Yep.
Um,
Viable Clan member actually asked in chat, should retros be engineers only, or do you typically have like a project manager or product owner and so on in there as well? I've done both. I've told my team like, hey, go run this retro and then just give me the notes at the end of it. When I was a manager, when I was an engineer, sometimes we preferred management to not be there so that we could actually hash things out as an engineering team where maybe we didn't want the manager to hear us like bickering or complaining about them or complaining about the management process of
mm,
how something worked. But I think it could go either way. I think it's healthy to have space for the team to kind of vent and talk about like what's affecting them as a team and how do they change like the team sort of structure without the management layer sort of over top of that, sort of foreseeing that, and just let the engineers work out like their own sort of like engineering process, where from a business point of view, like if you want to change up something about how we do sprint planning, or how, some other type of meeting happens or something, just give me that generalized feedback after the fact, so that there aren't names attached or whatever, that if something goes wrong, I'm like,
Mm.
oh, that was Ian's idea, let me write that up in Ian's file, because that was a horrible idea. Unless it turned out to be a really good idea, and then it's like, maybe we do want to give kudos or something for that. So sometimes it makes sense to have management there, sometimes it makes sense to not have them there. I would
Right.
say for a product owner, I generally wouldn't have them in a retro, because a retro is really meant to be like what went really well about the sprint itself. As far as like, did we plan things well? Did we execute things well? Like Ian was out sick and a bunch of people had to cover his work. Like, that's really what your retro is for. And then like, how do we adjust for that next time? Like, does anybody know that they have like a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment or something like that coming up, that we can sort of account for, assume that
Mm.
someone's going to be out one day over the sprint, like make sure that you're not taking on too much stuff. You can always take more tickets during the sprint, but don't fill up your time 100%, because if something happens or you get delayed on something, now everything else gets pushed out. And,
Mm.
so like those would be the kinds of things that my team would talk about, like when I was an engineer. As a manager, like I said, sometimes I would say like, hey, you folks go have a retro, like I'm not going to be there, just give me some high level feedback afterwards on things that you want to try differently, and go from there. Bakari, any thoughts on running retros or things like that?
Yeah. So just like you were saying, I have done it both ways, and I could see the value of a manager not being there. And I think it kind of depends on the um, the culture of your team. So sometimes the culture of the team is it's a bit more flat, and people feel comfortable with the manager there, and also on that information flowing to the manager, I guess you could say, but also the manager being able to give kind of a wider perspective on things in a retro. You might be complaining, well, why is it doesn't X, Y, and Z? Actually, at a company level, this and this and this is happening, and this
Right.
is how it affects, our team. So I can see how it could be effective both ways. The other thing I was going to mention, like with you were kind of talking about planning, like the sprint packing, when you're planning your
Mm.
week or 2 weeks, whatever your sprint is. It's also important to have people like designers, I think, and PMs,
Mm.
because sometimes they can shed light on like a particular feature, and um, details about a particular feature that it may not need to be a drawn out conversation, but just their insight can be really helpful in figuring out, for instance, how long this is going to take and what does this actually mean, because sometimes you get a description of a task, or a description that's going to go in your sprint, and it's not a whole lot of detail, it's not been
Mm.
fleshed out. So sometimes that happens in those sprint packing meetings. So if that's happening, then PMs and designers are. It's important to have their feedback.
Yeah, for sure. The other follow up question I was going to have, so you were out in Salinas where there's mostly agriculture, but you were teaching physics at the time. Was there some combination of the two of those that led into what you were doing with NASA?
So NASA was before that,
Oh, it was
before all of
before
that.
that. Okay. Oh, I
That
got you.
was
Okay.
in college, and yeah, so it was NASA. you know, Being a physicist in college, and then becoming a teacher, and then moving back to the Bay Area, continuing teaching, but now teaching engineering.
Okay.
And that's kind of was actually how I transitioned into engineering, as I was teaching engineering. So I was teaching digital electronics, I was teaching some electronics engineering, and then I was teaching like 3D solid modeling and 3D printing and prototyping,
Gotcha.
robotics, a combination of different engineering disciplines at the high
Gotcha.
school level.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Sweet. So then you moved back and you're doing the high school, middle school kind of stuff. So what came after that? So take
Yeah.
us on a
So
small journey here.
yeah, interestingly, as I was, this was another light bulb moment, but as I was playing around with all these different technologies, it was like being a kid in a candy store, except I was a teacher. So, didn't last, that feeling doesn't last long because you have to, you know, be a teacher. Um, but I realized that the way my brain is wired, engineering is a really good fit for me.
Hmm,
And so I actually ended up going back to school, getting a CS degree, and then, uh, going to a boot camp, a JavaScript boot camp. And I came out of there, and after about 5 months of interviewing, technical interviewing, and I guess we can dive into any of that if you want, but about 5 months of interviewing, I got three offers from three different companies, and yeah, I accepted at Accenture, and I started out as a senior JavaScript engineer and just took off. I really loved web development, and I kind of got that bug pretty early because I was just playing around with different things. I would like build a physics engine in C++, and then I would play around with graphics, and then I would play around with 3D modeling and write a script to automate some process. So I was touching on like lots of things to kind of get an idea for what area of software I wanted to work in,
right.
and it ended up being web development.
So lots to unpack there. So you did a CS degree and a boot camp. Did you feel that the CS degree wasn't enough, or that it didn't prepare you for the kind of work that you wanted to do? What also led you to go to a boot camp as well?
So as I was doing my degree, I actually went to University of Silicon Valley. It's kind of well known in as Cogswell Polytechnical College. It's well known in California, but not really around the country. But their philosophy really is about mixing art and engineering and leadership.
Right.
And so, like lots of my um, uh, folks that I went to college with, they're working on Spider-Man, or they're working, with Disney, Marvel, 2K games, all these different places that you have that intersection. So I
Mhm.
got a really good, solid software engineering education, and they had a web development program, but I just felt like there were, and I was always like looking at jobs. I was always looking ahead, like, okay, what's next? Because I, had at that time had a family, so it was like I can't sit for 2 years and kind of try to figure out what I'm going to do. I kind of want to hit the ground running when I leave. So I found out that like web developers were in high demand, particularly if you knew a couple of frameworks. And so I wanted to get some framework knowledge and some experience with JavaScript in particular, working in the browser. So that's why I did the boot camp. It was a 4-week boot camp, and uh, yeah, it had the desired effect because I have the CS background, and now I had I had a portfolio, and I had some JavaScript and React and Angular knowledge,
Cool. Okay.
which made me very employable.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, cool. And then from there, you said once you went through the boot camp, you did 5 months of interviewing. So take us back. Like, what year was all of this going on? So you got your CS degree and your boot camp. What year was that? And tell us about what that 5 months of interviewing was like.
It was kind of hellish, to be honest.
Sure.
That was 2016. So there's a lot going on in the world at that time. Uh, so it was 2016, and you know, uh, I actually went to another boot camp. It's not called a boot camp, but it's essentially is. It's called Outco, or Outco.io. You can look them up. And it's all about uh, mastering the interview, mastering the behavioral part of the interview, mastering the software part of the interview. All of the it's data structures, algorithms, and then learning them themselves, and then also learning how to solve different problems and go about solving problems using those, and then how to really construct a compelling narrative about yourself. To tell me about yourself, all the different kinds of behavioral interviews, how to network, and how to use LinkedIn. So um, it was very, I would say, thorough in preparing me to interview. So that was a 4-week program, that Outco
Okay.
program, and then I started interviewing, and I had there were so many opportunities and so many applications that I started a project management board. So I had a Trello board that I
Hmm.
created to track all my interviews, where I was applying, where I was having phone screens, where I was doing a technical screen or a take home, where I was doing on sites. And I think it ended up being like maybe 400 or 500 applications over that 5 months. Probably about 100 to 200 phone screens. Definitely there was some. I don't know how many projects I did. I didn't keep track of that.
Okay.
And then there was 20 on sites, about 20, 30 on sites. And some of them were like real small companies, some of them were medium-sized companies, and some of them were like Google, Facebook, those kind of companies. um,
Yeah.
and then I ended up getting 3 offers, from a large company, one from a small company, and one from a medium company.
Okay.
um, yep, and I took the I guess the medium company. If
Okay.
Accenture you can call a medium company.
Cool. What were some of those interviews like, as far as like what kinds of questions were they asking? Like, did you keep any sort of stats on like, oh, the average was like 4 or 5 rounds of, such and such, or like, could you sort of keep track of anything like that, or?
There was actually a huge variance,
Okay.
particularly with kind of the medium and smaller companies.
Okay.
There was a lot of variance there. So um, sometimes I would just bring my laptop in, and I'd be talking about, because I didn't have a whole bunch of experience behind me. So my calling card was, what have I built? And
Right.
so sometimes I would just bring my laptop and I would say, here, this is an application that I built. I let them play around with it. And then they'd start asking me questions like, why did I make different decisions that I did? Um, in some cases, it was kind of a combination of take home, uh, like a phone screen, then like a take home, or like a test online. And I would take that, and then if I got past that, then I would go to an on-site, and then there was like multiple rounds, so like 4 or 5 rounds, um, or 4 or 5 different people, and they would typically be like a manager, and then like a couple technical interviews, and then maybe like another cultural fit type interview.
Okay.
And typically I could nail, because I had pretty good story constructed, and I could nail like the behavioral interview, but it took time for me to be able to nail any kind of technical interview, especially
Mhm.
with that large variance. With
Yeah.
some of the larger companies, they had tended to have more standardized data structure and algorithm type questions that they would ask you.
I
So
see.
in the phone screen, definitely you were going to get asked, some kind of data structure or algorithm, and you need to talk about Big O, trade offs with time, space, complexity. Um, they would ask you a bit about yourself, but it'd be like 5 minutes at the beginning of the interview,
Mhm.
and then if you had any questions at the end, if there was time left, um, again, like maybe 2 minutes. But the majority of that interviews, most of those interviews were was your coding.
Right.
Um, so
Uh,
yeah.
Yep. Full Snable asked in chat, like, how many rounds of interviews do you think make sense, as far as like the phone screens and like the in person? Like, what feels like this was a good interview process versus this was too short or this was way too long? Like, what do you feel sort of makes sense as far as like the number of steps to make a candidate go through?
Um, I kind of like a short, recruiter screen, and sometimes that can be done over email, but I tend to like the personal touch, them kind of being able to ask questions about the process. What does it look like? And then having like a phone screen, and then 3 or 4 rounds. I think you can get signal um, with that many interviews. And I actually have a lot of feelings about this because, in my grad education program, one of the things that I studied was, and it's studied and also was able to implement during this Japanese lesson study, was authentic assessment. And
Mm.
um, I, I just think in lots of cases, I'm not sure that the company is clear on what it is they're asking, what it is they want. They know what they want, but how to translate that into in a 30-45 minute interview, you know basically constructing it like a lesson, right?
Mm.
What is the outcome that you want?
Right.
How are you going to get to that outcome, and how are you going to design um, your interview so the signal that you're getting is the signal that you're wanting?
Right.
Or are you testing for instance, cultural bias? Because your signal is going to be noisy if there's some cultural bias, and there are ways to remove that. Um, how good someone is at interpreting written English. That's another thing that's can dirty your signal. Um, then there's ways to eliminate that, so you're getting just the signal that you want as a company or as an interviewer. So anyways, I'm kind of on a rant
Hmm.
a little bit here.
No, no, no. No, that's exactly right. And I think good companies need to try to retrospective themselves on, hey, did that interview process work out or not? Like when a company turns around and has to reject a candidate or they actually hire somebody, getting their feedback and say like, hey, what was good about our process? Like, what did you like about our process? What could we improve about our process? Or especially if you hire somebody and it doesn't work out, a company really needs to go back and evaluate, okay,
Mm,
how did we hire that person? Like, how did they get through our process when they shouldn't have? Was it
right.
a cultural thing or was it a behavioral thing? Like, I remember the last director role that I had, someone came in and we were looking to, I think they were doing some DevOps work and they got through everything okay, and we sat around as managers and we're like, all right, what did everybody think? And it was a small startup, and so there were a lot of us kind of in the management layer who were all directors. And I had one director go, I wasn't really comfortable interviewing them. And but they didn't really go into a lot of detail. They're like, yeah, just something about them kind of creeped me out. And we didn't really pay too much attention to it. And we made an offer and brought them on. And like within 2 weeks, they were creeping everybody out, like especially the women on the team.
Oh
And
man.
they ended up letting him go. Like I actually left the company right before this person's start date, and they let that person go like within 2 weeks. And they're like, dude, you can't like go up and like touch people on the shoulder, like wrap your arm around them and like lean over them while you're
Yeah.
talking to them. Like that's just no, you can't do that. And in retrospective, we should have paid more attention to that one director who felt creeped out by this person. It's like we should have caught that as a signal, instead of spending all this time and money, bringing someone on, doing all the paperwork and getting them in the payroll system and whatever, when it turns out we shouldn't have hired them. Um,
Mm,
and so I look back on that and go, okay, that's a lesson learned for next time. I think companies tend to do that when an employee doesn't work out. But I think when an employee does work out, to still go back and look at,
mm,
like what signals did we get? Could we have gotten those signals with fewer questions or a shorter process, or would a shorter process not give us access to some of those signals,
right.
like you said? And I think that it's kind of a constant evaluation that you've got to go through on, hey, we're getting pretty good at, if we ask this kind of question, we get this kind of answer, and that tells us what we're looking for. Can we combine those questions somehow to, ask fewer questions, maybe have fewer steps next time? But
Yeah.
I actually talked about this on the stream like a long time ago, like last summer, I think, where I was talking about like companies have to be careful about asking too few questions where they're trying to get a lot of information. Like, tell me about your background and tell me about the first couple of jobs you had and tell me about
Mm,
this. and this and this and this, and meanwhile your applicant is like, wait, you just asked me like 5 questions all in one question. Like it takes a long time to unpack that and answer all those properly and so on. You can
Hmm.
actually confuse your applicant and not get the signals that you're looking for. And so again, it's a constant evaluation that you've got to go through for stuff like that. But
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I a friend of mine who is in DevRel at PayPal um, encouraged me to actually write a blog. Actually, another, so a recruiter, it's like two people recently encouraged me to write a blog. One said that I should write a blog and talk about my story and
hmm,
we haven't gotten to this, but my battle with, neurodiversity and mental health,
right.
being in tech and being
Hmm,
a person of color, but also another person, the person from PayPal said I should really write down my thoughts about how we can improve interviewing and bring in my perspective as an educator and someone that's a master at authentic assessment and that actually has training in that. So I've been kind of batting that around in my brain, like, okay, it's I don't know, it's like I'm a little scared, I guess, little afraid to put myself out there,
hmm.
uh and potentially, have blowback, I guess. But I don't know, maybe I'll do that. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Cool. So I want to go back to some of the projects and take home stuff. So when you were being interviewed by these companies, they had you do some take home projects. And then you mentioned when you were at the interview, you also brought your laptop to show some of the projects that you'd been working on.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about like what kinds of projects did companies have you build, or what other kinds of projects were you building to actually demo at those interviews?
So typically, like, if the company, so like if it was say for instance a front end position, then it was probably like an application using a stack that was similar to what they were using, but it was like a small. So like building out. Let me think about an example. So like actually, I can give an example from like right now. Actually, something I'm working on right now. So like one company, it's for a staff engineer position or a staff front end engineer. They asked me to build a Pokédex. This is basically a deck of
Okay.
Pokemon cards, and then they gave me a whole bunch of business requirements, and they said this should be done in 2 to 5 hours, and then like let us know if it takes more than that time, because we want you to just turn in something functional so we can see like how you
Gotcha.
code.
Yeah.
So they also said, they wanted me to use Redux in React, and I can't remember if there are any other technical requirements that they wanted me to use, but those were the big ones.
Hmm.
And then the other things were just like, it should be searchable, and it should
Sure.
be able to search by this and this and this and this. So like that's an example of like a take home project. In some cases, another company asked me um, to build. It was kind of like this music app, but it was basically just displaying data using their API, because I was going to be on the apps and API team,
Okay.
and so they wanted to see me interact with the API. That was kind
Hmm.
of like the not the phone screen, but like the initial screen
Yeah.
was that take home, and they said I could do it in any language that I wanted. So I did. You did it in Node, which was really interesting. But yeah, I turned that in, and in fact, I ended up getting that job. So I did that, and then I did a couple technical interviews via the phone, and then I got an offer. This is 23andMe. I got
Hmm.
an offer. I didn't even like try to negotiate. I was just like, I'll take it, which isn't a good practice. I don't
Right.
recommend that. But
Yeah. Always
I was
negotiate
just
for
so
sure.
yeah, I was just so like happy that I
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
an offer that I signed.
Yeah. Full Snable mentioned in chat, I've sometimes brought my laptop to interviews. Most companies appreciate it, but some said they explicitly don't want to see it. Some companies will not want a strange device on their network, so they may not have like a guest network for you to get on. I
That is true.
typically say like if you can turn like a hotspot on your cell phone or something, or have everything installed in such a way on your laptop that you don't even need a network connection, like your database
Mm,
and everything that you need is like already on your laptop ready to go, or you've got some sample data that you can cycle through or something like that to sort of mimic, like what would actually happen as part of an authentication lookup or something like that. But yeah, I agree. Some companies just don't want laptops on their network that they don't know, that they can't
hmm
trust. Um, but I always tell people like bring your laptop either way because you don't know if they're going to have a system for you to work on.
hmm
And I would always tell candidates like bring your own laptop. We'll have a guest network that you can join, or if you want a hotspot, that's fine. But I would rather you come to the interview and use tools in an environment that you're comfortable using. You kind of see the stress level come down a little bit as opposed to like, here's a laptop you've never seen, here's a bunch of tools you've never
mm,
seen. We want you to write code. Well, it's going to take you several minutes just to figure out, okay, well, what editor's on here? How do I use that editor? Where do I
yeah.
find the code? Like, why make a candidate go through that? Like, yeah, it's going to be like that on your first couple of days at work anyway, but like, I want you to come in with less stress to the interview. And so I would
Mm,
always tell the candidate, like, if you have a laptop, bring it. If you don't have one, we'll loan you one for the day. But bring stuff that you're familiar with. Bring code that you're familiar with. Bring an environment that you're familiar with. Whatever editor you typically use. Like, I want to see you be your best self in that interview. So um,
yeah.
the other interesting
That's a
thing
good
that
one.
that you mentioned is using technology that they would be using, like if they wanted you to build a project with React or Redux or whatever, that you would go in and you would add those kinds of things. Was there ever a point where you felt like you could say like, hey, I just did a project using these technologies, can you just evaluate that? Or did you always kind of like, okay, they asked for a take home, so let me start all over again from
Mm,
scratch and like build a brand new thing? Or did you ever say like, hey, you know what, I'm going through these other interviews and I just wrote this block of code for this other company,
yeah.
do you want to evaluate that? Or give them a project you had already written and say like, hey, instead of doing this whole take home, like could you just evaluate this code and see if this gives you what you
Mm.
need?
Yeah, actually, yes.
Okay.
You're right on the money. And it's actually happened more recently because I have some talks that I've done. I had this one talk that I did on integrating Square within like a Next.js, React meta framework. And so I've used that talk or like repurposed it, like made it longer, made it shorter,
Mhm.
you know, changed things about it to target a different demographic or audience. So I've used it at multiple companies recently for DevRel, um, for the presentation part of the DevRel um, interview.
Cool.
Definitely.
And then so you mentioned like you got a CS degree. You went to this boot camp and learned about some JavaScript. Was it a separate boot camp that taught you the interviewing, or was that part of the JavaScript boot camp?
Nope, that was
It was a,
separate.
it
That
was
was
a
a
separate
separate
one. And
separate.
then
I was a glutton for punishment or glutton for boot camps, I guess.
but you mentioned after all of that, like you interviewed for 5 months and your first job was as a senior level developer. So like you're brand new with this technical education, but they brought you on as a senior level. How'd that happen?
Yep.
That's really rare to happen like that. Was it because of the other background that you brought, or like what
I
what
think it
allowed you
was.
to step into a
Yeah.
senior role?
So I think it was a combination of the background I already had, um, just being technically savvy, being able to pick things up.
Mhm.
Also, I think to that interview, I think I might have brought my laptop and I brought some full stack JavaScript apps that I had built, and I was
Okay.
able to talk through them intelligently and clearly and answer questions. And they were like, "This guy is at a senior level, so we're going to
Interesting.
offer him a senior JavaScript position." Even though I didn't have like all these years of
Mhm.
experience, I think it was just all the work that I've been killing myself like in college, and then like on the side I was doing free code camp, and then I did a JavaScript boot camp, and then I did the interviewing boot camp. So I think all of that combined helped me really showcase myself really well. And I was able to land. I'm just grateful that I was able to land that position. That really helped kind of rocket my career.
Yeah. So was it a senior level role that you had applied to, or you just applied for like a JavaScript developer role, and then during the interview they're like, we're going to bring them on as a senior?
Right. So it was. So I can't remember what the external title was. Oh, I'm sorry. The external title was a senior JavaScript engineer, but Accenture has these internal titles that
Okay.
don't really make sense to the outside, and so it was this title, and I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to this, but it wasn't apparent at the
Hmm.
outset that it was a senior level
Gotcha.
engineer, and so I was. I remember I was in negotiation for salary. This time I actually was negotiating because I had
Okay.
3 companies now. And as I was negotiating, I said, this company's offering X, and I would like to be at X number in base salary. And so they were like, okay, that that number happened to be at a senior level,
Gotcha.
and they really wanted me on the team, so because they knew I could come in, hit the ground running and all of that stuff.
Interesting.
Um, yep.
And I think it's worth pointing out too that in this case you said you were negotiating because you had multiple offers, but you can still negotiate even if you only have a single offer from a company.
Right.
Your background, like Bakari was saying, like Bakari's whole background led them to this role where they were able to like position themselves as a senior dev. Even if you don't have like that varied background, you still have other background that's valuable to that company. Other work experience, other life experience, other education that even if that's the only job offer you have, you can still negotiate based on what they offer you. You don't have to take the offer as is. Sometimes, like Bakari said, when 23andMe came around, you're like, I got a job offer, I'm just going to take it. That's okay. Like, you can do that. Absolutely, you can do that. But no, you might be leaving money on the table, is sort of the saying that we say, where you could have negotiated for a little bit more money, um, or some other perks or things like that. But like, you have to understand everything that goes into that offer and what sort of side development perks, like professional development. Like, could they send you to a conference to do some additional learning? Are there other things that, other training and other programs, or, extra time off, or you want a gym membership or whatever? Like, are there other perks and benefits that you could negotiate for? All of those things are possible. Like, negotiation is all about give and take. And you're not just saying, I want this, I want this, I want this. You have to explain why you sort of deserve it or why you should have earned that as part of the initial offer. But you can negotiate even if it's the only job offer you have. You don't
Hmm.
have to wait for multiple offers in order to negotiate and say, well, I've got this offer and now I've got this offer, and have them sort of play against each other. There's some dangers there, but it can be kind of fun to like pit them against each other to some degree. But you don't want to be so aggressive about it that everybody walks away and now you have zero job offers.
Yeah.
But even if that's the only offer you have, you can still negotiate. So I want to be really clear on that. Um, so then you found your way into developer relations, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but the interview process for DevRel is a little bit different. So getting into developer
Mm.
relations or developer advocacy, those interviews are quite a bit different in some regards to a typical engineering type of interview. What would you say are
Hmm.
some of the key things that sort of stand out different about like what you do in DevRel, excuse me, and the differences in those interview processes?
Yeah, and so I can actually explain that via just explaining what happened to me personally. So that I had that first senior JavaScript engineer position, and I was working there for a while. And I had a friend who was working at Roblox. He's an engineer, still an engineer at Roblox. And he said, "Hey, we have this team. I had never heard of DevRel. I've never heard of developer relations. I didn't know what it was." He said, "We have this team that is responsible for like the API, is responsible for documentation and education, and you get to code." And it was just like all these things. And I was like, wow, education and coding? That sounds cool. And so he said, yeah, I can refer you. So he referred me, and I applied. And I can't remember what the initial, I think I talked to, oh, that's right. I talked to a recruiter, and I remember we are going back and forth, and I was in Georgia because I have family out there, and she actually called while I was in Georgia, and I was like, okay, we can have a talk this time. So we actually set aside some time. We talked, and then I actually talked to one of the DevRel members. I think his name is Laker. I'm not sure if he's still at Roblox, but they said that they wanted me to basically do a project and essentially like write a tutorial. It's like a coding tutorial.
Mm.
And so I sat and I thought about like, okay, how can I make myself stand out in this process? What about my background is unique that would add value to the team? And
Mm.
so I was thinking, oh wait, if I were like doing a tutorial and it was like dry and boring, I would like want to put some music in it. So what I did is I took Bill Nye, the science guy.
Science guy.
I took that song and then I like basically reworked it. And I called it Bakari programming guy. I multi-tracked my voice, recorded the song, put it up on YouTube, and then embedded the YouTube into the tutorial.
Okay.
And then I wrote like that was step zero, and then step zero was like get hyped and get excited or something like that. Then
Okay.
I did step one, step two, step three, and I wrote out like step by step. This is how how to do whatever it was, tic tac toe or something like that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they got that and they were just like floored. They were like, no one has ever done anything like this. So they passed it around the company and people were like, did you see this guy that's on
That totally
doing a
happens.
YouTube
Yeah,
video?
yeah, absolutely, that happens. Yeah, someone will submit something and it will go viral within the company. I've been in the
Yeah.
same spot. Yeah, yeah.
So what I didn't know, but because I didn't really understand all of that developer relations was, but it's not only about coding and documentation, but it's about also content creation and being able
Mm.
to relate to your audience, to think about who your audience is and how to best reach them. And I think with that, I really demonstrated that I had those chops. And so they brought me on.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
but yeah, it was that interview, and then it was actually an on-site interview that had some coding in it, and it was like on a whiteboard coding uh whiteboard coding interview. So there are behavioral interviews. There was kind of like a take home, basically like writing not code, not just write code, but like writing like a tutorial. Like if you were writing a tutorial or a blog, like how would you do it? And then like a actual coding interview. So they wanted, the technical, they wanted the content creation and creativity, and they also wanted the behavioral and the values. Um,
Yeah.
so some of those things are similar to a software engineering, but some aren't.
Right.
Some of those skill sets aren't necessarily required because in
Right.
some cases, as a software developer, you're sitting at your terminal coding,
Yeah.
and they don't really care if can speak to people um, or in a content creation sense.
Right.
If you're going to be public facing, or if
Yeah.
you can speak at a conference.
Right. Right. And I think part of what got me the job at Postman, is they're like, well, we want you to build an API, and I'm like, well, I literally just built this API for Datadog. Do you want to look at that? And they're like, okay, yeah, that's enough. And then they're like, okay, we want to see how you can like give a presentation and speak. It's like, well, here's a video of me like teaching API design using Postman at the school where I just taught. And they're like, okay,
Nice.
that's more than enough. And then they're like, we want you to spend some time in our community. And I'm like, well, here's my Quora and here's my Stack Overflow and here's, these other links of where I interact with communities. Like I'm happy to like do these things, but like, could you evaluate this? And at almost every step, Postman was like, yeah, okay, that's enough.
Mm,
And I didn't have to go like as above and beyond because I already had things ready to demo. But in some
yeah.
cases, you do have to sort of prepare things. Like one DevRel position I applied for, they're like, we want you to put together a little talk on, one of these like couple of topics, and one of them was how do you make, um, it was around like accessibility. And I took a little
Mm,
bit different spin on it. I'm like, well, instead of just talking about like web accessibility and screen readers, I'm going to talk about accessibility from a learning point of view because everybody has a different learning style. And so here's how I think about writing blog content for people who are, like visual learners. Here's how I put together
Hmm.
video content for people who are video audible learners. Here's how I put together
Hmm.
a tutorial for people that are kinesthetic that want to like actually do the thing. And that's what I gave as the talk, and they're like, "That's brilliant. That's exactly what we want to do."
Yep.
And part of what I said in there too is when I was giving that talk, is I was deliberately talking a little bit slower, and I worded everything very carefully, and I had like my entire script written right underneath my camera that I was following very clearly, and I said, a couple of things that I did during the presentation at the end, like once I wrapped everything up, they're like, okay, that was really good. And I said, well, I bet you didn't catch like these main themes throughout, is that I didn't use red, green color or blue, orange color for
Mm.
color accessibility. I made everything sort of black and white and shades of gray on purpose for color accessibility. They're like, oh, we didn't even catch that. I said, I also spoke a little bit slower than usual because not everybody watching that video later on is going to be a native English speaker. And they're like, oh, we didn't catch that either. I said, and because of that, I also didn't use contractions anywhere in my talk because that also helps with language barrier and translators. And they're like, what? Like it blew them away that I put that much thought into it. It's like,
Yeah.
there's learning accessibility, but then there's also the internationalization of, the audience of your company is global. We need to account for that global accessibility from a language barrier point of view as well. And they're like, we would have never thought of that stuff.
Mm.
And so like thinking about those kinds of things will really set you apart. But like not everyone's got like the time and the space of like, or the talent of doing like, let me go remix this music and put that in as a background. Like not everyone's got that kind of time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're already working a job and you're trying to like do take home things for companies as you're applying for jobs. Like how would you recommend someone to sort of juggle and balance like, oh, I
Mm.
got this take home thing, but I still want to stand out as a candidate when they haven't got like hours and hours and they've only got a few days to like hand that thing back in? Like, what kind of advice would you give somebody around how to juggle or how to sort of balance that time where they want to stand out, but maybe they haven't got like all these tools and
Yeah.
availability for stuff? What would you suggest to them?
Um, if you don't have a lot of time, I think one of the best things you can do is, and this is like leading up to before, and before you have that interview, is like really networking, using LinkedIn, in person events, but just having a really good network so you can ask advice. You can ask people advice that maybe have been in DevRel in that kind of position for 20 years. And you're like, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z. What do you think are if you saw a candidate, what would be above and beyond for you? And
Mm.
kind of getting different perspectives. If you can talk to someone at the company, that's even better, because you can kind of get a flavor for the values of the company. It might just be that it's this that they're looking for, and it's this that is above and beyond for that company. It's not, you don't have to go in and remix a song. You just need to really nail API design. And they're like, oh, wow, that's what we're looking for. So, yeah, I would say networking is really important. If even if you don't know folks at the company, if you can ask the recruiter. I have pumped. Just I had a recent interview, and I was pumping the engineering manager for information, and I like really worded it carefully, but I essentially was like, what are the top? And I love to ask this question: what are the top three characteristics that you'd like to see in this developer advocate? And
Mm.
so they typically answer that. And
Yep.
then I would say, okay, what to you would be going above and beyond? If you saw this in a
Mm.
candidate, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is. And so the guy actually answered it, and he gave me a real clear answer. And I was like, oh, okay.
Sweet.
So I'm
Nice.
actually working on building that. I'm not going to say the company because I don't want to be competing with any of y'all.
Yeah, good deal, good deal. Yeah, I really hope we open up our hiring like soon. Um, because yeah, like getting to know you over the last couple of weeks, it's like, oh man, like we're really gonna miss out if we can't bring you on the team. Um, not to bias my team if any of them are watching right now, but we need to hire this guy.
Well,
Seriously.
I'm here. I'm
Yeah,
looking.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, standing out as a candidate is a really big thing, and I did something similar on mine too, and like even when I interviewed at Postman, I one question that I tend to ask is like, what skill do you hope your next teammate brings?
Hmm.
And then like making sure that that's part of my speaking points going forward with the team, so that when they get together later and say, Ian said that they were gonna like go do this thing, that for some of them they're like, oh yeah, I mentioned that would really stand out, and wow, they're actually going and doing that thing, right? It's just it lets them know that not just that you're curious about what goes above and beyond, but that you're actually willing to go do that. But it does come down to like the time and the energy. And, I coach a lot of people, who are on the job hunt, and they're like, I'm working full time, or I'm trying to find a full time job, and I'm trying to
Hmm.
juggle all the take homes, and I want to stand out, and I'm trying to figure out like, how do I stand out, but I've only got so many hours in the day, or I'm working
Right.
full time and I've got kids or family and other obligations, and I'm trying to find this job, and I got all these take home assignments that people want me to do. And I think that that's where a lot of my advice came from, is like, well, can you ask the company to evaluate code that you've already written instead of
Hmm.
having to start all over again and build a whole new thing from scratch? Just say, hey, here's my circumstance. Like I've got a family or obligations, and maybe you don't even have to go into that level of detail, because sometimes it's none of their business if you have other obligations. But you can say, like, hey, just to shortcut things and speed up the process a little bit, would your team be willing to evaluate this project that I just wrote, for this other company that I'm interviewing at, especially if it's a competitor, and say like, hey, I'm actually talking to your competitor, but I would really prefer to like keep talking to your company, but I just wrote this take home for them. Could you evaluate that? Or here's this other company that I'm currently interviewing with. Could you evaluate the code that I just wrote for them a few
Hmm.
days ago or a week ago? They just want to know, like, show us something current that you've done, or it may be in a specific technology, like you were saying, like you got asked to do like to put Redux into a React project that you'd already done. Sometimes there is like a specific thing that they want, but maybe you could just put that into an existing project as opposed to starting something all over from scratch
Hmm.
and starting all over again, because those do take time. That,
Yeah.
sometimes just saying like, hey, like looking through my portfolio and looking through what you want me to build here, this project is really close. Could I just take this aspect of this new thing you want me to build and add it into this other project that I've already got, and just
Hmm.
submit that as my thing? Um, because like like we were saying, like not everyone's got the time of like, oh, let me go find that video and remix it, and like yes, that will make you go above and beyond too. But I think what a lot of companies are really looking for, especially just for engineering roles, is can you take existing code, can you add features to it? And I think if you can take an existing project and just add something else to it, that they really want to see a particular technology or particular way of doing it, is that something that could sort of satisfy what it is they're looking for. And that can save you some time right there. And so where you're not like rebuilding the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again, because that does get tiring and it does wear you out as a candidate of like, oh, I got another take home to do. There's already enough hoops and enough steps and enough things that you got to go through for
Yeah.
all the different kinds of things, about the different steps in the interview process, that anything you can do to help shortcut their process also makes you look like a good candidate too, of like, hey, let me help you make this more efficient. What if I did this in place of this? Like, is that still
Mm.
gonna like satisfy what you're looking for?
Definitely. And just to jump in here, the other thing that I've employed is just thinking about the velocity that I am, velocity and volume. So the two V's. So, like the velocity that I am applying to companies, because the more companies that you apply to, typically, the more responses you're going to get. Like
Mm.
those things are directly proportional. And so then your volume of work goes up. Sometimes it depending on your life situation or how fast you want to go or how the economy's going, you may want to apply to more or less companies. Um, in this case, if you want to be able to have more time to do like creative things or to do something to go above and beyond that you don't already have, um, decreasing that velocity can help.
Mm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, you're right. To some degree, it is a numbers game of like the more companies you apply to, the more likely you're gonna get those interviews and so on. Um, but it also depends on like how you apply and what sort of makes you stand out as an initial candidate to begin with. Like they need to see clearly on your resume that you sort of fit the profile they're looking for. So you have to show like some amount of relevance even in your application. Otherwise, you're not even going to get the call. Um,
Right.
but at the same time, you don't want to make, a single like super generic resume and like send that out to everybody and hope that you're going to get a phone call from that. Like it's got to be a little bit tailored to what it is they're looking for. So
Yeah.
again, you show that relevance to them. Um, but it is kind of a numbers game, especially now with the economy and, people getting laid off. It is a little bit trickier to sort of stand out. It's not impossible, but it's trickier to stand out.
Mm.
But I think it really does come down to what is that relevance, and how do we find the relevancy of making you stand out as a candidate? Like, what is it about your profile, about your background, about your projects that company is going to be really interested in?
Yeah. And I actually have a bunch of different resumes. Um and they and then I kind of tailor it down to three resumes, and one is like geared at front end. So it's got the word
Mhm.
React all over it. And I like highlighted that. I have a DevRel resume that I'm now using. And it's much more effective at showing my DevRel experience, because some of it has been intertwined with my software engineering experience and some of it's been separate. And then I actually created like a Google Doc that has like the programs that I've built and the content I've created, and
Mhm.
it's got links in there. So I actually have a link to that Google Doc at the top of my resume. So, a curious person is like DevRel details. Let me click on here, and then
All right.
they can read it and they can see it. And then the third, I think, is like a general resume. It's like a general like engineering resume. So it'd be like for a full stack position.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I did the same thing when I had my job hunt a year ago. I basically had a management resume, an engineering resume, and a DevRel resume because I wasn't sure what it was I wanted to be when I grew up either. It's like, which of these roles do I want to do next? And as I applied for jobs and started going through the interview process, I'm like, oh, okay, I don't want to do engineering. I want to do either DevRel or management. And then as I started getting job offers, I'm like, okay, I think I want to do more DevRel than management. And so then I
right.
focused on just those. Um, so yeah, I think if you've got like a multidisciplinary kind of background, like coming up with multiple sorts of resumes, I think makes sense. But then having like tailored sort of lists of projects, like you say, or different YouTube talks or things like that, depending on the role that you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
Having that stuff ready to go, or just be able to present on that resume of like, I typically tell people make a really big resume with all of the things. So like all of my DevRel things, all of my engineering things on those two separate resumes. And then when you go to apply for a job, make a copy of that and trim it back down to a page by stripping out everything that's not relevant to that company,
Mm,
because there are going to be certain technologies and certain things that that company's not going to care about seeing.
mm-hmm.
And so if you start with a really big resume, it's way faster to like trim stuff out and bring it back down to one page,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like, oh, let me go reorganize this resume and save that. Now let me go reorganize it again and save that. It makes it a little bit harder to keep track of like, oh, how did I talk about that one project on that one resume 50 revisions ago? Right? It's like you can put that
Yeah.
on the big sort of main copy of your resume and
No,
then
I
like
like that.
make a copy of it and trim it back
Yeah.
down. So it's kind of a riddle that I learned when I was a kid of how do you make a sculpture of an elephant?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, yeah. How do you make a sculpture of an elephant?
I have no idea. I could ask my son. He's
You
pretty good
start
at
with a
it.
giant block of stone and you chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant, right? And you
Okay.
can do the same thing with a resume. Is you can say, how do I look like the best candidate? Well, you start with a really big resume and you chip away everything that doesn't make you
Mm-hmm.
look like the best candidate for that job. So you
Mm-hmm.
trim away all the other stuff that they don't care to see, right? And now you look like your resume only includes the details that are highlighted in their job post that that company's going to care about, and so you
Mm-hmm.
can now highly tailor that resume just to that company. Um, and so and now you've got a specific version of your resume just for them. or for a particular industry. Like I want to focus on API development. So my engineering, my DevRel, I'm going to put just all my API stuff on that. And now any sort of API job I want to go get, I've got an API, DevRel slash engineering kind of resume that
Hmm.
I could put together for something like that if I wanted to.
Right.
Or if I want to be a particular type of manager, I can like trim, all the stuff out and just put like my management experience about what I want to
Yeah.
highlight about being a manager. And now any manager job I go apply to, I've got a slightly more generic resume that I can show just for, my management skill.
Yeah.
So that
Same for
that can be.
mobile, DevOps,
Mhm.
observability, you know.
Yeah. So depending on what kind of role you want to go for, you can come up with a slightly more generic resume that you could shop around to multiple places instead of giving, like 5-10 minutes to trim this whole thing down for a particular company. Because as you practice the trimming down, you can literally craft a new resume in like 5 minutes. And I've shown that on my
Mm.
stream in the past where I took my really big resume and I'm like, someone go find me a job post and I'll show you how I'm going to trim my resume down to apply for that job. And somebody found me a job post. I'm like, all right, sweet. They're looking for this kind of skill. So let me go trim out all the other stuff. And I brought it all back down to like 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, I had a tailored resume. And I'm like,
Wow.
all right, now let's go do a cover letter. Let's go pull in all these generic like cover letter template things that I've got. And let's go build a
Hmm.
cover letter for that role and like trim things out. And I made like a 3 paragraph little cover letter for that within a couple of minutes. And just showing that kind of process, it makes it a lot easier to go apply for that job.
Yeah.
Where you're not like, scrutinizing over every little word and whatever. It's like at some point you're just like, I'm happy with this resume. I'm happy with this layout. Let me just put the pieces in that they care about, and I'm just going to send that thing off. And if they've got
Hmm.
specific questions or they want me to go into more detail, that'll come up in the interview. And so, it doesn't have to be like hyper focused resume. It can still be kind of a, here's me as DevRel and like the kinds of things I want to talk about, or me as an engineer, and these are the kinds of things I want to talk about. But there are certain things that that company is going to want to hear you talk about, and so there's some
Yeah.
amount of relevance in there that you got to put in.
Yeah, and it's with DevRel. I really that sounds really cool. What you were doing with kind of the 5 minute shave down for a resume or
Yeah,
constructing a cover letter. I would like to go back and see that.
yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say. I was going to say something else. Just completely blanked out. Uh, yeah.
We
Oh, I
were
was
also,
just going to say
yeah.
in DevRel, I've noticed that uh, with some companies, with some like developer advocate or developer relations engineer positions, they want the candidate to be really strong with a particular either like their technology or kind of a class of technologies, like say
Hmm.
observability, right? They're in like the observability space, or they're in their A/B testing space, or they're like a developer tool in the browser. It's a browser tool. So in some cases, like there was a Google position that I was applying that I had applied for, and it turned out that they really wanted someone that was an expert with service workers.
Hmm.
And so I didn't get it because I hadn't demonstrated
Right.
my expertise in that, and I'm not an expert in service workers. It's something that I want to learn and grow in. But yeah, for that particular, it was for the Chrome developer relations team. So like with
Okay.
Google, their developer relations is really granular, and some companies are like that, and some are a bit more general.
Right.
Uh, but some they want you to know a technology or a class of
Yeah.
technologies.
I would say for a company the size of Google, they're going to have so many different facets of the company that they are going to have very hyper specific teams for each of those things. Like, they've got DevRel for Android, and they've got DevRel for Chrome, and they've got DevRel for Google Cloud, and they've got DevRel for Firebase, and they've got DevRel for this and this and this. Like they've got,
Hmm.
probably 100 different DevRel teams with dozens of people on each of those teams. But the smaller the company, the fewer opportunities they have for that kind of thing. Like even at Postman, we've got different kinds of DevRel. We've got like the student focused group that focuses on colleges and universities, and they've got a DevRel team. Ours is more like the open technologies where we're talking about API standards and so on. That's the DevRel team that I'm a part of. And then we've got like solution engineers that are doing more on the engineering side, but they're still
Hmm.
doing a lot of customer interaction where it's kind of DevRel, but they're not really doing like conference talks. But they'll come to conferences and work the booth and stuff. So there's a little bit of overlap on some of those, but it depends on the size of the company. We're like 600-ish employees, and so we've got the flexibility for that. Companies that are smaller than that, they're going to have like more generic DevRel teams. Like the first DevRel role I
Mm-hmm.
had, um, you know, it was a small company. I mean, when I was there, I think there were only about 20 or 30 people in the whole company. And so DevRel kind of had to do all of the things, right? We were doing solutions engineering and conferences and meetups, and we were doing, content creation. But then as the team grew, like people sort of like got to focus in a little bit more on sort of their specialties and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
the size of the company really does matter, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes applying for that particular kind of role makes a big difference. Like one of the jobs that I applied for a year ago was with DigitalOcean,
Mm.
and they've got a couple of different a couple of different DevRel teams, and they were starting up a whole new division just for serverless. And they're like, we're looking for
Mm.
someone to come in to do DevRel to kind of head up the whole serverless kind of thing. And I'm like, I could probably do that. I've tinkered with serverless, and like, well, we want someone that actually knows serverless, not just tinkered with it. And so again, it was like I didn't have the level of skill that they wanted, so I didn't get
Mm-hmm.
that job. Um, but I also, I already had a lot of other interviews on the go at the time, and I had already had other offers, so I didn't push them for like, well, do you have another team that I would be applicable for? But if that were the only job I were applying for, I probably would have fought a little harder of like, okay, well, I still like DigitalOcean. I'm a customer of yours. Like, is there some other team that I would be more suitable for? And I would have,
Mm.
been a little more aggressive around that. But in that case, I already had other offers coming in, so it was no big deal not to get that job. But since then, I've learned more about serverless, but I'm not going to change my job right now. I like what I do.
Yeah.
But there is some amount of relevance in showing the experience, and not just I can go do the job. Like sometimes they do need very specific skills. Now, of course, I got Liam Neeson in mind of like I have a very particular set of skills. Um,
Yep.
but some companies do want that, and some of them just want to know that you can go learn and step into a role, where maybe we've already got some established stuff. And so there is a balance to strike, but I think it does depend on the size of the company.
Mm. Yep. Yes, sir.
Cool deal. Any other topics you wanna get into? Anything else about your background you wanna speak to?
Um, that relates to tech? Not really.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking. I mean, I think we've kind of covered a lot. We've covered DevRel.
Yeah.
We've covered a little bit of music.
Have you ever
Um,
uh, have you ever combined like programming skills with your music skills, like to figure out like how to programmatically put music together or anything like that?
um, I haven't really delved into that. I did study audio engineering for a bit, and that I guess that was the closest because we were actually constructing signals and frequencies from like just one frequency, and we would do like ring modulation. We do all of these different processes to have a combined sound. It was sound synthesis and orchestration was the name of the course.
Okay.
It was really interesting. And it essentially was that it was the combination of engineering and like music, because the
Cool.
end goal was always like to produce sound that either evoked a reaction in people. And sometimes that reaction was like fear and dread, and sometimes it was just like happiness.
Right.
um but yeah, that was just kind of an interesting time. I ended up deciding that wasn't going to be my career path, just because I
Hmm.
didn't see a whole lot of jobs. I saw a few. When someone needed like either a sound engineer or a sound designer, it was like one person in the whole company, or there were two. And when they needed one, they really did. But when they didn't, it was like they weren't really hiring. But web developers, you could just throw a rock in any direction
Yeah.
and find an opening. So
Awesome.
I ended up going with that.
Fool Snibble was asking in chat, like, what's the job market in the U.S. these days? I mean, the market is still pretty competitive. You know, there have been a lot of companies over here that have been doing layoffs, and so I think some companies are being very careful about who they're hiring. They're being a little more selective on it. And some companies are like, well, we need to do layoffs, but then they realize, like, you know, there are still parts of their company where they still need to do hiring.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, just because a company does layoffs doesn't mean that they're not hiring anymore. It just means they're going to be more careful about who they hire. They need the right kind of people with the right kind of skills. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're closed off to new developers or like, and by new I mean like entry level or early career
Mm.
development. You know, those roles still exist. Some companies are going to be looking for, you know, I've said on the last couple of streams, I think we're going to see salaries come down a little bit until the market kind of picks back up again because there's going to be a supply and demand. Like, you know, we just had Twitter lay off you know, a bunch of people. Meta just laid off a bunch of people. Amazon just laid off a bunch of people.
Mm.
Oracle laid off some people. Even Salesforce laid off some people. And so
Yeah.
there's going to be some talent on the market, and I think that's going to bring some of the salaries down a tiny little bit. Not a bunch. Like I don't think we're going to see like a 20-30% drop in salaries, but I think we're going to see it come down maybe 5-10%. And then it'll probably pick back up again once hiring sort of normalizes. I think closer to you know, Q1, Q2. But I think definitely gonna see some changes happening there. But you know, as far as the overall job market, I think it's going to be um, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out over the next couple of months for sure. You know, as these
Yeah.
folks are kind of like getting into the realm of like, okay, you know, I just got laid off, like, wow, you know, take a week or so to recover from that, and then like get back into the job hunt. You know, I think it'll take, you know, take some of those folks like a minute to sort of regroup, come up with a resume, start figuring out what kind of jobs they want, go apply for those jobs. And so if you're looking for a job, like now's the time to sort of beat all of those people to the rush of you know, mass applying
Yeah.
for these other jobs. Some of them though, you know, if they're on a work visa or whatever, they're going to be scrambling to find a job. But other folks, I think they're probably going to take their time and go, you know what, it's close enough to the holidays. I'm just going to take the holidays off with the severance, and you know, I'll look
Mm-hmm.
for something in the new year. Like some people are going to have that flexibility and others won't. Like anybody on a visa, they've got like 30 to 60 days to find a new job or they have to leave the country kind of thing. So those folks are going to be scrambling to find something new. Um, but I think the overall job market, like there's still companies hiring. You just have to be able to show high relevance to that job, and you're going to get the interviews.
Yeah.
And some of that'll come
Definitely.
down to the projects that you build. Some of it'll will be, you know, based on your background and how you show an interest in what they do. I think that's going to show a lot of relevance for, you know, should I call this person or not.
Definitely. And I
Um,
think it's going to be an interesting dance between companies as they shift, as they do their 2023 planning, and then as the economy shifts, and then as companies kind of shift in response to that, in response to what other companies are doing, and then this supply of all of these engineers now entering the job market and that are looking. Um, it's just going to be it is it's going to be kind of an interesting thing,
mhm.
and I'm kind of feeling like it's like if you're playing musical chairs, just like sit on one of those chairs and just don't move
Yeah,
around.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Stay where you are because it's gonna be a
Yeah.
rocky year.
We got Whip in chat. Hey, Whip, good to see you. Asking, I'm curious to learn about the costs of boot camps and how payments were arranged. Some boot camps are free, like
Hmm.
100 Devs is free, Free Code Camp is free. Other code camps, they're going to charge you money, and it could be anywhere from thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what they're teaching, the length of the program, whether it's a full time program, things like that. Those are going to vary quite a lot. Some of them will do, you know, sort of loan repayment programs called ISAs. They're like an income share agreement that, you know, it's free while you go through the program, but once you find a job, you pay back like a percentage of your paycheck or whatever if you make over a certain dollar amount. I think in California, ISAs are now illegal. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects some boot camps, but some boot camps, like that is their revenue model, is like we're gonna sort of I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, they're going to prey on people to go get a really good tech job because they want
Hmm.
15% of your take home, for a year or something like that. And so the more money you make in your salary, the more they're going to get out of it, to make up for people that get low paying jobs and they don't make as much money off of it. Other boot camps, they're just going to make you take out a loan, and, or they'll work with private lenders or whatever. And then you're kind of subject to interest rates on those loans, and interest rates are higher than normal right now. So there are costs involved for sure. Um, as far as like how those payments get arranged, some of them will, they'll say, well, go take out a loan, but you don't start paying it back until you graduate. But then it's an even bigger scramble of, well, I graduated, now I have to start paying that loan back, but I also have to find that job. And so now you've got to come up with loan payments and find a job at the same time. And that puts a lot of pressure on people to like, do I just go find any part-time job just to pay back that loan while I'm job hunting? And then how do I juggle that? Like that can really affect you from a mental health point of view, as far as like
Mm.
understanding like how to juggle that stuff. Any thoughts on that, Picard?
Um, yeah, I would say from a personal perspective, like, juggling, the subject of mental health and, being in the job market, it's a really tough time for a lot of people. And um, sometimes it's like, to some degree, it's like finding that match. But sometimes you find that match and there's like five people ahead of you
Mm.
that, are also qualified. And so it's like competing with them, like it just feels kind of icky. Like I
Mm.
don't want to, like I know those people have families too, um, or they have lives, and so do I. So it's not like I feel like I'm more deserving of them, but
Mm.
want a job. I want a job. So there's
Yeah.
like that whole like psychology, and also like absorbing lots of, I wouldn't say failure, but lots of redirection. When I say redirection, like basically you apply for a job and for
Right.
whatever reason, you go through the process, and you don't get it. That can be tough to handle. But I've been leaning on my um, my support system and family, and just folks on Twitter that I'm just kind of talking to as I'm going through this process, and other folks that are just like cheering me on. Those things are all important. And then having conversations and going online, and you know
Mhm.
meeting people like Ian, all of these things kind of feed my soul. So I don't know. That was kind of all over the place, but
No, it's good. It's good. No, you're right.
um,
Like you definitely have to have the family support. If you've got friends and family around that can help out with things, like it can be a temporary inconvenience of like I got to go all in on finding a job. So like whatever I can offload onto friends or family for a couple of weeks or whatever it's going to take to get that job done. Like
yeah.
and by getting the job done, I mean like getting the job, because finding a job is now your full time job. And so finding ways of sort of offloading tasks or things like just, hey, for the next couple of weeks, could you help walk my dog, kind of thing, or maybe not that, but
Hmm.
like because you also need your own breaks and whatever to get outside and touch some grass, but like
Can
you
you
know
walk
like
me?
but like just finding ways of like, hey, you know what, like I'm not going to be as much help like with meal planning or buying the groceries or something for the
Mm,
next couple of weeks, like can you help with
yeah.
that? Or like, hey, like I got to do a bunch of interviews, could you help watch my kids? Like there are friends and family that will help support that, but like you know there's a balance of like asking for too much help versus balancing like what can people help with, or who do you have in your life that can help
Mm,
you out. But like you have to ask for the help. Like that's the thing. Like this shouldn't all feel like it's all on your shoulders. There are people around that can help, and there are ways that you can sort of have, like I say, like help you with this temporary inconvenience of like I need a job, and so I need people
hmm.
to help out in the meantime. Um, so having a support network, and even if it's just friends or a community that you can kind of like commiserate with, like every little bit helps. So yeah, I mean, lean on the people that you have in your life for sure. and do
Definitely.
your best to sort of like juggle things or tell people like, hey, you know what, like I'm only available to interview in the evenings because I work a full-time job during the day, and like, but I really want this job, but I really can't interview during the daytime or something. Like some companies will be flexible like that. Some won't, but some will. And it's just a matter of finding those companies that are willing to work with you. With again, if you can show relevance, they'll do what they can to sort of work with you on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the words you said that just kind of resonated with me was temporary.
Hmm.
Like we have to remember that like this adjustment period, and I call it an adjustment period because the economy is adjusting to a number of things.
Yeah.
But it's temporary. Like we're gonna get through this. Like we got through 2001, we got through 2008, we got through 1990, whenever it was.
Right.
Um, now it's 2022 going into 2023. um, the economy's going to adjust and then rebalance, and then we are going to adjust with it. So I have a friend that always used to tell me, Bakari, you remember it's about the long view. Like
Mm.
it's not just about what's right in front of you, it's about keeping the long view. And I think that's important for us to remember, that this is temporary and
Yeah.
that this isn't going to last forever, that in 6 months it's not going to look the same. In 12 months it's not going to look the same. We're going to
Yeah.
look back and go, remember 2020? What was it like in 2020? Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was
for
so
sure.
long ago.
Right. And I mean, honestly, we're gonna look back on like 2022 the same way that we look back on 2008, 2009, as well as like the dot-com bust back in 2001.
Yeah.
I was on the cusp of that too. But like sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time. Like in 2001, I was working at a financial services company, and I hated my job. But when that dot-com bust happened, like everybody needed financial services, so our company went through the roof. While
Mm,
everybody else was crashing, ours actually grew, which felt a little bit manipulative of like but those kinds of services were needed by people at the time, and so it made sense to stay at that job even though I didn't like it. Well,
yeah.
specifically, I didn't like my manager. I liked the job, I liked my CEO, but I didn't like the manager that I worked with. But
Yeah.
and then in 2008, 2009, we saw like kind of this surge of startups happen because real estate was tanking and caused all
Yeah.
these other problems in the economy, and so some businesses were shutting down, and that kind of again it launched this whole new realm of startups, and I got in on one of those early stage startups in advertising technology. And
Hmm.
again, that went gangbusters, and we helped people with websites make billions of dollars in ad revenue. And then so it's just right place, right time. And now I'm at a point where I'm at a company who other companies rely on. They use our software and they rely on that software to get their job done. And so again, I'm kind of right place, right time right now. And I think not so much that you need to anticipate like, oh, I bet there's going to be an economic problem a year from now, so I better go find a job in the financial services. But sometimes you can kind of see, as we say, kind of the proverbial writing on the wall of like, okay, well, things aren't going very well from an economic point of view. Maybe I need to figure out like, and I've said this on a couple of streams now, like what do people stop spending money on when economy goes bad, or where do they start focusing their attention when the economy goes bad,
Mm,
and go find a job in that industry. Like maybe now is the time to go find a job at a bank or an insurance company. As inglorious as that kind of job can be, it's going to be a safer job than like, oh, let me go apply for a job at that startup, right? Because those startups are going to be a little rocky, and VC funding's not as flowing as it was like even a year ago.
hmm.
Some VCs are starting to tighten their pockets a little bit, while they kind of ride out this storm too, and other companies are doing layoffs and so on. And so it makes it, a little risky to go. Maybe now's not the time to go apply at that startup. I mean, maybe it is, depending on what the startup is doing. If that startup is showing high relevance and it is something that companies or other, consumers are actually going to use, if it makes sense, food
Mm.
subscriptions and, streaming services and things like that, maybe. Financial services, definitely. You know, is it time for like Web3 and like blockchain? Maybe not so much with everything else going on with blockchain these days. Maybe now's not
Just
the time
yeah.
to get into blockchain. Um, But like there are going to be ebbs and flows, that we see all through the industry, and I think it's going to it takes a little bit of foresight, and it's easier, I think, for Bakari and I. We've been around the tech industry, and we can kind of see these trends, and we can kind of see like, oh yeah, this thing is happening with this company, or this kind of thing's happening with that company. Maybe it's a good opportunity to jump in here versus like jump out of there. Not always going to be the case, but when you're brand new in tech, like Bakari, what would you tell somebody like brand new in tech, like these are the kinds of jobs you should aim for, or these are the kinds of companies you want to stay away from? Like, what would you recommend for people who are trying to get a new job? They're brand new in the industry, or they just finished 100 devs or something like that. Like, what kinds of
Mm.
companies should they be aiming at to go get these jobs, or should they just start a consultancy and like be a consultant for a while? Like, what do you think makes sense in the job market right now?
I actually, so both. So one of the
Okay.
things that I did is I Googled a whole bunch. I Googled like different kinds of engineering. Like I looked into like, you know, how plentiful are like, audio engineer jobs? How plentiful are, engineer jobs with C++? How, in what industries are those in? How plentiful are jobs with JavaScript? And what industries are those in? Can I be a graphics engineer, for instance, and work in JavaScript? So I was just gathering all of this data. And at first, I wasn't really like making a judgment, but eventually I felt like I had enough data to go, okay, it's a safe bet that if I go into UI development, which I really enjoy, that's going to be, it's going to cross um, it's going to it's going to be a cross disciplinary type of position. So you can work in finances, you can work in
Hmm.
Web3, which it didn't exist at that time. You could
Right.
work in pretty much any industry, and UI development is it's just
UI is
going to
UI. Yeah.
UI is UI. Like
Right.
it's happens in mobile, happens on the web, it happens on devices, all kinds of devices, Amazon devices, consoles. uh, so that's how I landed on UI, but I just really tried to figure out where the jobs are, and you don't necessarily have to go that way, but at least you have some data to act on, to
Right.
make an informed decision. You're not just kind of like jumping out there. If you want to have a long career, um, you can save yourself some heartache by like looking at data and looking at trends. And um, I've kind of kept that mindset even as my career has developed. As I made the switch to DevRel, like it seems like DevRel has seen um, kind of an increase in popularity at companies that are particularly companies that have something to offer developers. Whereas before they may not have had DevRel, it's becoming more like part of the public consciousness. So um, it felt like a bit safer bet for me to make that jump back to DevRel.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Good times. Yeah, it's
Good
going to be
times.
interesting to sort of see how this plays out. Like, in the new year, like we saw a lot of FANG companies say like, oh, we're going to start hiring again in the new year. Apple's, basically like we're not going to hire until like late 2023. It's like I think
Hmm.
Apple's even going to get to a point where it's like, okay, we need to keep innovating. We need to keep hiring. Like there are going to be some roles, and also just natural attrition. People retire or they decide they want to change jobs, and
Hmm.
there's going to have to be backfills for some of those. But I think where companies are being more careful is around like brand new projects or brand new ideas or brand new initiatives. Like
Mm.
maybe it's going to be a bigger thing around like we need people on our established teams, on our established projects that we know are money makers or worthwhile pursuing, and like do we build up those teams? Do we have enough people? But I think there's always going to be natural attrition within a company too, and so I think companies are going to be backfilling those kinds of roles all the time.
Hmm.
Even if they say they're on a hiring freeze, there are going to be like backfills that they're going to have to sort of step in.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see how this plays out over the next, I think, 3 to 4 months. But there's also kind of this myth of like, oh, the last quarter of the year is like the worst one for hiring because everybody sort of freezes their hiring anyway at the end of the year because of holidays and nobody wants to interview around the holidays, and that's not the case. I found when I did my job hunt a year ago, like, yeah, there was like, oh, we're actually out the week of Thanksgiving. Well, that's fine, but like there's still like tons of other opportunities to interview and so on that they can make happen. And so again, if you show relevance to the job and you show interest in the company and what they do and who they serve as customers, like people are going to reach out to you and want to interview you.
Mm.
And now may be more of a time to like establish your network as opposed to doing the interviewing and just really,
Hmm.
coming up with a really strong network on who and who can introduce you to someone else that might be hiring or might have open interviewing or whatever going on. Like now's the time to like get in on some of that. And I think
Mm.
it's we'll definitely see some changes and some shakeup, over the next little while. But I don't think it's like a total dead end kind of thing. Like, oh, nobody's hiring it right now, so I'm just not even going to bother like interviewing or applying. It's like, no, now's the time to get in the front of that and be able
Hmm.
to show that relevance and be able to show, why you matter to that company and why that company matters to you. Like tell them like why you think that that company's a good fit for you and your career and so on. I think that it's a good position to be in. But
Yeah.
it is going to be tough for sure. Like I'm not going to lie to people and be like, oh yeah, finding a job right now is going to be easy. Like it's not. Like especially finding a first job in tech is horrible. Like Bakari
Hmm.
had a CS degree and 2 boot camps and still took 5 months to find a job. Like
Yeah.
that's the reality of it. It's going to take some time. Um, do you think like no like looking back and knowing now what you know, or if you knew then what you know now, um, do you think that there would have been a way to speed up that 5 month process and sort of shortcut that process?
Um, that's a really good question. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking no. I mean, I guess one of the things is looking at how people interview. Um, and because, like, say, for instance, if you're interviewing for a FANG, they're going to interview a certain way, and you're going to
Mhm.
have to prep a certain way. If
Sure.
you interview for a different company, they're going to interview a different way, and you're going to have to prep a different way. So you're prepping two different ways. And if you have three or four or five different ways that companies interview, they're going to interview. Um, you're going to have to prep all those different ways. So that multiplies the amount of work that you need to do. And in some cases, you may not be strong in all of those ways of interviewing or those interview philosophies. Um, so yeah, maybe kind of just focusing on, well, with Fangs, there's fewer companies, but focusing on like companies with a particular interviewing methodology that you're interested in. Um, and just really nailing that, like for instance, nailing data structures and algorithms, being able to really do whiteboarding well, being able to um, answer the general cognitive ability type questions and behavioral questions in 5 minutes to be able to sum up who you are. But just nailing that and nailing that really well. I was kind of like a bit more all over the place in terms of like what kind of companies I was interviewing for, and because I started like more narrow and then I didn't get a job, and so then I just like made it more wide in terms of what I would accept, and then I made it wider, um, and I think in some ways that lengthened the time.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree with that. I think building up the network is definitely something that can help shortcut the process a little bit around like
Hmm.
who do I know that can introduce me to somebody or who do they know that can introduce me to somebody and just spending a lot of time on that networking. I think networking is going to find you a job faster than just like blasting a resume out to,
Yeah,
500 companies and hope for the best. Like, I think that it'll definitely help. Um, Castile was actually saying
sure.
in chat, one thing I can think of is companies like Reviture, they'll hire you with a degree and contract you out. And I do agree to some to some point, like finding a business like a consultancy kind of group that can sort of hire you out is good. But I think with the economy right now and businesses trying to cut back on expenses, realizing like if I set up a consultancy shop and I hire Bakari and then I sort of rent Bakari out to work for some other company, I'm charging them like two or three times what I pay Bakari.
Mm,
Well, that also means so that means to that company I'm charging like $500 dollars a day, or sometimes up to $1,000 a day for Bakari's time, but I'm only paying Bakari like you know a couple $100 a day sort of thing. And so a lot of businesses are like, well, I could just hire somebody like Bakari and save two-thirds of that cost, right? And so, because as a company, I've got overhead, and so like, yes, I'm hiring Bakari, but I've also got the overhead of like the management structure and trying to drum up the business and doing sales and things like that. And so their job isn't to just hire Bakari out for Bakari's salary. Like there's sort of a like a profit margin on top of that that they
mm-hmm.
need to charge. And so some businesses would be like, well, why am I paying $1,000 a day for this engineer if I could just go hire my own engineer for $300 a day? And so yes, consultancies are a good place to get a job, and you learn a ton at a consultancy shop like that. And plus you get to rotate projects. Sometimes every 4 to 6 months you get put on a whole new project, and so you get that freshness of like, oh, cool, I get to go learn something new or maybe some new tech. But I think that can also be a bit of a dangerous job, because I think that's where we're going to see more people not find work, because as businesses want to cut expenses, they're not going to cut like, oh, let's stop using Gusto for our payroll. They're going to look at this and go, well, let's cut this consultancy group and let's just hire our own devs. So I think it can be a good learning opportunity, but I think that that's probably a riskier move right now as far as trying to find a job. This is my 2 cents. I could be wrong on it, but I think that it would be a safer bet to not get a job at a consultancy firm right now. Castillo followed up and said, "There's also a small chance the company will buy out your contract." Yes, but a lot of times the businesses will have something in effect that says like, if I'm the consultancy business and I hire Bakari and I sort of rent Bakari out to that other company, where I say like, hey, you're not allowed to hire Bakari directly because they're my employee. Or,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe that is part of the contract. Like if you really want to hire Bakari, that's fine. We'll charge you like an extra premium or whatever, and then you can just hire them directly if you want. Sometimes that is
Yeah.
part of the contract, but oftentimes it's not. Like if I've gone through the process of hiring Bakari, I want to keep Bakari on my team because it's worthwhile to like sort of rent Bakari out for these high dollar value projects where you're bringing high relevance to that other project. And so it's worthwhile for me as a business to sort of rent you out at $1,000 a day versus, you going and get a job, even making $500 a day. Better for
Mm.
you, but worse for me as a business. And so sometimes I'll protect my employees in that regard and not let a company hire me direct or hire you, my employees directly. But yeah, it's every industry is going to be a little bit different for sure. But cool. Well, I think we'll wrap up. So yeah,
Okie
awesome
doke.
talk. We had a really cool conversation the other day, and it's great chatting with you some more today. Like I said, I really hope we open our hiring soon because I'd love to have you on our team. But
I would
we'll
too.
we'll see. We'll see. I'll keep putting the pressure on and see what we can do. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much I can move things on my side, but I'll definitely I'll point people to our conversation for sure and see if we can make anything happen. But I don't know.
Sounds good. And likewise, Ian, it's been great. Talking and getting to know you. And I love that picture we took. We took this picture and put it up on LinkedIn. Uh, I was so surprised at how many people you know commented on it, or
Yeah,
I was
or you
looking at
just
the
reacted on it. Yeah,
yeah, I was looking at the analytics on it and it did pretty well. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the fun thing about DevRel, right? Is we have like kind of our own little tight knit community, and as we kind of meet people and like other DevRel, like, oh yeah, I know like one of those people, or I know both of those people. It's like, cool, let's reshare that or comment on it or whatever. I mean, there's certainly a lot of DevRel folks out there, but we are kind of our own little tight knit community. It's always great when we can meet in person and not just virtually over a camera like this, but actually hang out and like shake hands
Yeah.
or bump fists or go grab a coffee or whatever it is, like just to go hang out. And I'm glad that you got a chance to chat with Joyce at that conference too, and get to
Oh yeah,
chat with her
yeah,
a little bit and
yeah.
stuff
We
like that.
connected
So,
on LinkedIn as well. So,
oh, sweet, awesome.
yep, yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we'll
Can
rate
I just
out.
do a little
Yeah,
plug?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Please.
couple things. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Backmamba. That's BAKMAMBA 74. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Bakari Holmes on LinkedIn. And then also you can find my music on bakarisoul.com. So that's BAKARISOUL.com. Little plugs.
Cool. We'll throw that in chat as well. So yeah, we got your link to the Spotify track that we used as our intro today. I got that in chat as well, so folks can go click on those and go check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, give Bakari some support. Go give him a follow as well on Twitter and on LinkedIn. If you go check out either of our LinkedIn's, you'll go find that picture of the two of us together. I'm just Ian Douglas 736. As many places as I can be. Um, Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out. Bakari, thanks as always. It's always great to chat with you.
Yep.
We'll have you back on the stream at some point, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
And let's see, who are we gonna rate? So there's a colleague I know who got laid off and is doing a job hunt. There's another engineering manager who's doing some triple bite. Um, let's see, who should we go rate into? What do you think? Engineering manager or laid off dev? What do you think? Bakari, who do you think we should go right into?
Oh, sorry. I was
No, no
so
worries.
you said engineering manager or who?
Or a dev that got laid off.
Definitely got laid off.
DevRel that got laid off but is now trying to get an engineering job.
Oh, okay. The DevRel that got laid off,
All right.
definitely.
All right. So we'll go right into ending with Allie. Go give Allie some support. She's working on some code right now, but can't show the code on her stream. But she's definitely interacting with chat. So we'll go right over there. And she is a little bit not safe for work, so maybe not as family friendly, but really pleasant person, like
Yeah.
really
I
fun person to get to know and stuff too. So
I think I'm following her on Twitter.
yeah, okay.
That name sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah,
Ending with Ellie.
Allie's pretty awesome. We've interacted a little bit and chatted a little bit. I also referred her to a job at Postman as well when we were looking for DevRel, but it didn't work out. But yeah, we'll go hang out over there. Make some noise and chat when we get over there. We'll catch you folks. I will not be streaming this Thursday or next Thursday, but I'll be back next Sunday with another guest. It's a former colleague of mine that we work together at SendGrid. So we'll catch y'all next Sunday. Otherwise, have a great week, everyone, and reach out to me on LinkedIn if you need job support. You can absolutely reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we'll find y'all then. And we'll see you next Sunday. Cheers, everyone.